I first want to characterize this person's calculus and what the priority of this person is as a pacifist. The first thing is that the reason why you become a pacifist is probably because you actually empathize with, for example, the unhappiness and the struggles or the harm that has been inflicted to these entities, for example, like the animals or like trees or any other like human beings or whatnot. What this probably means that the ultimate goal of this particular person and the reason why you become a pacifist is to maximize the utility and happiness of all the entities. And this should be the metric of judging this debate also as well, because I believe that this debate, we're going to prove to you as to why this particular choice of cutting the trees is necessarily going to maximize the happiness of the Bubblehead people. The second thing is that you also put yourself into other entities' shoes at the end of the day. So even if it's true that, for example, you don't have the epistemic access to, for example, like other entities, for example, you don't have epistemic access to, for example, other peoples or other people from other countries or like animals or even like other like sentient beings, like for example, like Bubblehead people. The reason why you become a pacifist is because you still want to empathize with the struggles and the harms that has been inflicted upon these entities, even though you do not have the direct epistemic access to these people. What you mean is that you prioritize the interest and the perspective of the other entities and who probably are the target of the action rather than your epistemic calculus at the end of the day. And therefore, I have already proven to you as to why the weighing of this today's debate is not necessarily about what you think as an individual, but you actually need to firstly try to calculate and try to examine what the interests of these Bubblehead individuals are going to be. The third thing also is that you have the incentive to minimize the harm or the viscerality about that particular scene of like cutting the trees as well. For example, like you can just call other people to cut the trees. Like you don't have to be the one who actually cut the trees and just see all the people like just dying at the end of the day. That is not in the interest of you at the end. So for example, insofar as you are able to make a decision of cutting the trees and therefore liberating these people and allowing these people to go to the paradise, I don't necessarily believe that you have to use the most like visceral and most violent way that you don't want to opt into. The second thing I want to talk about is as to why this particular cutting of trees, not necessarily the act of violence at the end of the day. This is because of two reasons. The first reason is because violence obviously is very subjective. Because I think, for example, if you give an analogy of sports players, for example, when they actually have a lot of like injuries and therefore it actually hurts a lot and you feel a lot of physical struggle to continue on playing a certain sport, you still play that sport because you believe that the pursuit of that particular career is more important for your self-actualization and actualization of your happiness. Or for example, it's a silly example. BDSM is also kind of like, you know, like people kind of like value that particular violence or that particular pain, which basically means that physical pain doesn't necessarily equate to the decrease of the utility and happiness of other people, but it's more about how you perceive that particular pain actually is important. And we told you at these Bubbleheads probably believe that the pain that has been inflicted by, for example, like the cutting the trees and therefore them actually physically dying is not necessarily a big harm for these people, because I think that the particular leader of this Bubblehead country probably will sincerely explain the background of these people believing in this particular religion or the particular religious scriptures that actually tell them to, for example, say that this is the way to paradise or whatnot, and why probably living is a very, very bad thing, and try to explain why living is going to lead to them being discontent with their current life at the end of the day. So probably you will be able to empathize with the struggles of these people by continuation of their life. The second thing is that I think even if harm has been inflicted to some extent, I think violence is also about comparative. No, thank you. Probably I think there is a lot of situation in which you probably have to make a trade-off. There is no such a thing like a perfect situation where you don't have to inflict any type of violence at the end of the day. That is about the degree of violence that you are going to inflict under either side of the house. Then probably I think the degree of violence that has been inflicted under our side of the house is probably much less lower, because I think the revealed preference of these, for example, Bubblehead individuals is basically something that they actually actively deprioritize the pain of actually getting physically killed at the expense of, for example, you getting much more spiritual solace by being able to access the paradise in the afterlife, and they actually value that much more according to the revealed preference of these people. Whereas under their side of the house, even if you are physically alive and not being inflicted by like physical pain, probably you living that particular current life in and of itself is a huge spiritual harm for these people. These people are going to live in the constant discontent of their life, and these people are going to be extremely unhappy at the end of the day. The conclusion of this analysis here is that probably under their side of the house, the degree of happiness and the utility that these bubblehead people will be able to access under your set of the house is extremely lower in comparison to our set of the house, where you actually enable these people to access this particular paradise, which is a spiritual way of solace for these people. I also want to preempt the argument coming from opposition side about indoctrination, because they would particularly say that, oh, like these people are indoctrinated and this is going to be like bad for these people. Ultimately, if you kill these people at the end of the day. But I would like to suggest that indoctrination in and of itself is not a bad thing, and it is symmetric under either side of the house. This is because these people who are living in this particular bubblehead countries are probably constantly reminded of the possibility of them actually being able to salvate it and to go to things like paradises, where they internalize value by things like media and, like, for example, education, or the familial values that actually talk about as to why they actually need to go to the paradise or whatnot. The religious scriptures, or the parents and the religious leaders, the media is actually talking about this all day long. And that exactly is the reason. That's why I think it is very, very likely that these people are going to heavily buy into this particular religious narratives, and these people are going to internalize to the maximum extent. And also there's a fiat in the info site that all people trust their religious leaders to the maximum extent, which basically means that all the people are going to firmly believe in the fact, in the statement, that these people will be able to go to the paradise when they are dead. Whereas if they actually live in this particular shitty life in the current real world, probably these people would not be able to actualize that. The last thing I'm going to talk about is as to why the degree of guilt under our side of the house is actually going to be much lesser in comparison to their side of the house, because I believe that probably guilt is going to happen to some extent under either side than it is about the degree. There are three reasons. The first thing is about the availability of coping mechanism, because under their side of the house, if you don't make the choice, for example, cut the tree, you will always be reminded of the possibility that you could have cut the tree, and you always see the tree in your backyard at the end of the day. And that's why at every single moment, you are still reminded about the available choice of cutting that tree. And by not cutting that tree, you're reminded of all the struggles that these people have to go through, because they have to continue on their own current life. Whereas under our side of the house, if you already cut that particular tree and there is no other reversible way for you to actually reverse that particular harm, that exactly is the moment when more coping mechanism can come into by, for example, like justifying and legitimizing yourself by saying that, oh, like probably these people would have gone to, for example, like paradise or whatnot. But the second thing is about the reason why we don't think that death is a good thing is because death is probably very irreversible, while you can actually die in any time in the future. Whereas under there's our side of the house, probably I think these bubblehead people cannot really kill by themselves, and that's why they are actually asking for the assistance from you, which means that life is also very much irreversible under their side of the house, especially for the bubblegum people. And that's why I think these people are actually going to feel that actually they having no choice but to opt into this particular bad life is something that is going to heavily be a very bad thing for these people as well. For all these reasons, I'm very, very proud to propose.
Great. I thank the PM for their fine remarks and would like to invite the LO. Here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, yes to both.
Okay. I'm gonna give me a couple seconds. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. So first of all, we have to make a few clear rebuttals in defense of ourselves as the actor, as a self-proclaimed pacifist who does not like violence or the harming of any living creatures whatsoever. So first of all, we have to be able to rebut how government side said that you empathize with living creatures, meaning that that's the goal of why you became a self-proclaimed pacifist in the first place. However, we don't believe that that's the case, because sure, empathy is empathy. That is why you may be a self-proclaimed pacifist, because you don't want them to feel pain or whatever, etc. However, in the process of fulfilling the Bubblehead's request of killing them, cutting down that tree, you are inevitably going to cause them the violence and pain before they theoretically would be ascending to heaven. So when it comes to maximizing, you said it comes to maximizing the happiness of the living beings. However, we need to ask the question, which is better, to maximize happiness or to avoid which would intuitively stick better to our principles and our set of morals and values in itself. Because even if I feel a certain way, even if the bubblehead people make me feel, oh, I empathize with them, they need to ascend to be able to achieve like true enlightenment or something, and I can only do that by cutting down the tree. I cannot do actions that are against my own personal principles, because that's simply like the way, that's just holding on to your identity, and that's you as an individual. You cannot, being grounded in your beliefs and your principles is just another way of just denying the bubbleheads of what they want, simply because, well, it's your, as the actor, you are acting in your own interest. You do not want violence for these people. You don't want to commit violence to these people, and maybe you're selfish and you want to only see things from your perspective. I do not want to be the one to commit violence to these people. So yeah, anyways, and then you also talk about how the bubblehead I'll take your POI in a minute. The Bubblehead Press will explain their religion, or explain their religion to make you better empathize with them. However, it's also irrational, because how they say living would lead to discontent, and it would be like better if they all died and went to heaven anyways. It's actually irrational, because again, it's not rooted in facts and logic. How are you supposed to be able to prove that you'll be safe in heaven? How are you just not going to die? And therefore it would lead to actually more guilt on your side of the house, because at least on our side of the house, we have less guilt, because the principle that we hold on to, by justifying that action of cutting it down the tree being against our principles in itself, would make us feel less guilty about not saving the bubblehead people. Because then again, like in your alternative that you pointed out, another person could cut down the tree. It doesn't necessarily have to be us. It doesn't have to be you who has to make this sacrifice or make this unnecessary action that you're not willing to take because of your principle. Anyways, those are my rebuttals. I'd like to take your POI.
If you're super depressed and you feel like there is no more meaning for continuing on your life, but if other people say that you should still continue on your life because of external reasons, would you accept that?
Isn't that how suicide prevention goes? I mean, if you're super depressed and you're tired of living, what isn't your first step seeking therapy, seeking help? Or maybe perhaps it doesn't really pertain to this debate, but just if you use that example of a person being depressed and wanting to end their life, then how can you prove that as the government that the bubbleheads are living a discontented life anyway? Because this says that they lived in a similar societal structure to humans. However, you're not saying that you're not trying to say that the bubbleheads are necessarily discontent or unsatisfied with the way that they're living now. It's that they're living in a purgatory, but they could have the possibility of ascending to a better quality of life. It's not necessarily that their standard currently is bad. It's just that there is the potential that the actor as yourself, that as the actor, as me, I might not believe in that. I might think, I don't think what you're saying is true, and I'm going to hold by my principles, and that's completely fine. And for all these reasons that I'm going to state in my arguments with multiple layers of analysis. So first of all, as an actor, it is against my religion. I don't believe in it. First of all, that's the principle of it, because, and you can't buy your case. I don't buy your case, because where can you prove that you're going to be happy? You're going to ascend to heaven, and you're going to be happy, and and by causing what is essentially a genocide by cutting down one single tree, how could you live with the possible guilt that you might feel that who knows, it might be real, it might not be real. You might think, oh, I might have saved an entire race of people, however I might feel guilty because I might have also committed genocide to a whole race of similar humanoid beings, right? And still, even if you did save the bubbleheads, or I did save the bubbleheads, the tree would still be a loss for me. It would still be unjustified, because if we look back to the info slide, that tree was given to us by our grandparents. How would you feel if you had to cut down the tree that your grandparents gave to you, which is the only last living memory of them that you have left? And like they say because you already cut the tree down, you say that because you already cut the tree down, you can reverse it and you will cope. But like the thing is, it's like you'd still be reminded of the action that you did, the guilt that came with you emotionally having to deal with the loss of your grandparents' tree, not just the loss of the bubbleheads and perhaps the slight companionship that you shared with them, but also your grandparents' tree. So there's also that to factor in when it comes to performing this action in itself. And so principally, because the tree was my grandparents, it has emotional value, and therefore it is unjustified if I were to cut it off. Second of all, the act of violence is the center of the religion, not the end result. Because the center of well, not really a religion, but my principle. The act of violence in itself, the committing to non-violence, the committing to not inflicting pain on other living beings, is the center and the focal point of what I believe in. So it's not the end result of what we're trying to achieve here, because in my religion, in my principles, it's unjust because the priority is my own principles and not the bubbleheads. I'm thinking in my self-interest, and I would like to just best avoid having to, first of all, cut down a tree, which is a living being, and second of all, ending an entire human race, an entire similar humanoid race that consists of hundreds of thousands of beings, right? The bubbleheads. And still, because not cutting down the tree won't send them to hell because they're still in purgatory anyway, it's not technically an act of violence, which means it still adheres to my principles. It's still adhering to pacifism. And another layer of analysis, like after cutting down the tree, sure, I'd feel guilty because they were like living a normal human life, right? So yeah, again, you might have just committed genocide because you don't know whether they ascended or not. And anyways, the end goal that we're trying to achieve here as the actor is to stick to our principles, as inaction or non-violence is better than committing violence and what could potentially be the unintended end of an entire race. And because we have to value all lives as equal, it cannot be numerically quantified whether one tree would be worth 100,000 bubbleheads or maybe 10 trees would be only worth 10 bubbleheads. It doesn't matter because at the end of the day, it's a principle and you have to stick with it. Therefore, we are proud to oppose.
All right, I thank the LO for their fine remarks and would like to call upon the DPM. Here.
Can I be seen and heard?
Yeah, yes to both.
Okay. Any way of life is dynamic and come with some sort of internal belief. It is not as simple as violence is bad because it is just bad and therefore I abide by it, especially with such a strong belief, which is why the opposition in this debate cannot run away by saying, oh, but then this person is opposed to all sorts of violence whatsoever. Oftentimes, I would posit that for such a strong pacifist, the reason why they come to this belief in the first place is due to some sort of underlying belief. This likely looks like things like the idea that suffering is bad, and because oftentimes violence brings things like suffering, therefore you don't want to use things like violence, and therefore you reverse things like pacifism. But the second reason why a lot of these people are probably pacifists in the first place is because a lot of living things that they see viscerally around them show avoidance to things like harm and violence, which is why you don't want to do these things. Under this, why do we think cutting down the tree is much more aligned with a lot of pacifist beliefs? The first reason for this is because oftentimes I think moral values on things like living probably applies differently to the people that are inside the bubblehead regime. The first reason for this is because in the world that we live in right now, one of the reasons as to why we place a large premium on living and not dying is largely because of things like irreversibility. This means that in the status quo, if you are living, you can choose what to do with your life at a later point in time, which means you can end it at a later point in time. But if your life is taken away, there is no way for you to reverse that. But I would say this sort of morality probably doesn't apply in this particular world, insofar as living is something that is also equally irreversible. Insofar as living on their side also is probably equally irreversible and unhappy. It is something that you cannot choose to opt out of, which means that living under the bubblehead, whatever thing, is probably as equally oppressive as things like death, which means that for bubbleheads, death is not a worse outcome. And therefore, pacifism doesn't apply the same way, no thank you, that would have applied to a lot of normal people. But the second thing is, I would say if their claim here is to say that causing suffering or the act of violence itself is bad, I would posit that the flip of this is also true. Insofar as you're the one that has perfect knowledge, that you're the only one who can alleviate the suffering of the bubbleheads. You're the only one with the capacity to stop this, and you're the only one who knows this. And this exclusivity, I would say, ascribes a moral value to the inaction itself, which means that insofar as you're the one that chooses actively not to act on this information, is also actively practicing things like negligence to continue to force these people to have to do things like suffering. So I would posit that knowingly ignoring the bubbleheads and their, for example, their pleas is oftentimes an act of violence itself, insofar as you have the very easy capacity to stop that suffering. You were asked to do this, but you also know that you're the only one that can do this. So insofar as you don't act on this, it's also an active choice that you are making. And therefore, it is equally a worse form of violence. And the reason why this is worse is because oftentimes a lot of bubblehead people are under their side, have to live under a perpetual despair of, like perpetual fear of having to exist for like the eternity of time. People are suffering for a longer period of time, which means that your inaction is actually a worse form of violence, and therefore you cutting the tree is much more closely aligned with your pacifist beliefs in the first place. So principally speaking, we're winning this debate here. But the second thing I want to talk about is guilt, because oftentimes, and I want you to picture the way in which the bubbleheads would have likely persuaded you, because oftentimes this persuasion would have probably happened in very emotional ways, insofar as a lot of the bubblehead people know that you're the only way for them to get into heaven. This means that they would have likely talked about all the pains of living that they have to go through on a daily basis, the ideal that every single one of the bubbleheads live each day for, and therefore they would have pleaded for you to cut the tree so that they can be freed from the despairs of living, and therefore they can be freed. This is also likely to be amplified by the fact that a lot of people who oftentimes opt into things like pacifism are very empathetic. They're very prone to things like caring about what other people feel, on a particular action, and therefore they like to feel large amounts of guilt. There are two weighing points under guilt. The first weighing point is on the intensity of guilt. I would posit that the emotional intensity of knowing that an entire civilization has to suffer because of the choice that you made not to act on the information you have, which means that you don't know whether or not these people are going to go into heaven, but you know for sure that these people are going to feel very real despair. You know for sure that they're going to lose their meaning in life insofar as you don't cut the tree for them, which means that although you don't know what the benefits of cutting that tree are, the harms that these people have to go through on a daily basis are very visceral and very, very real. On government, you can live free knowing that you have alleviated that suffering from them, and therefore you have abided by your pacifist ideals much better comparatively. But the second thing, so even if you don't buy that the intensity of guilt is likely to be worse on their side, the second weighing point is on the frequency of guilt. This means that every time you look at that tree, you are not reminded of your grandparent. You're reminded of the pain of subsistence and the pain of being that a lot of these bubbleheads have to go through on a daily basis. On government, it's very simple. You don't have to treat, you don't have to see it, and therefore you're not reminded of it. This is very important, and although this might sound simplistic, oftentimes guilt is trigger-based, which means that if guilt is symmetric on both sides, or if killing the guilt, or if the intensity of guilt you get from killing the bubbleheads and not killing the bubbleheads is symmetric, at least on our side, you're reminded less of it because there are less triggers around you to trigger that memory that you had of that reminds you of the bubbleheads and therefore causes suffering. Before I move on, POI. 3,
Wouldn't your personal empathy outweigh your mandated action? Wouldn't you opt out of your religion? The fact that he's a self-proclaimed pacifist means that he will abide by the mandated action even if he feels like he should do something else.
Correct. So that's a wrong comparative because they're assuming that empathy and then the mandate has to be in clash with each other. In this case, the empathy is probably likely to go towards cutting the tree as well, which is why it's not a comparative between like moral mandate and empathy. It's like moral mandate and empathy is both telling you to cut the tree. So I'm not sure what the debate here is. The last thing I want to talk about is a really funny point about the tree. Like, guys, your grandparents probably have other stuff around you. Like the fucking tree is not the only thing that like your grandparents left behind, right? So I don't know why that's like the debate. The last thing I want to talk about is indoctrination. Sanghyun explains to you that indoctrination cannot be changed. And no, they cannot say this is like suicide, right? The reason why we don't allow things like suicide is because suicide is a temporary state which alters the calculus you have made to make a choice that you have otherwise wouldn't have made. This particular instance is not something that you're making under like some sort of like temporary state. This is like the religion itself is something that these people really believe in. These are choices, conscious choices that these people are choosing to opt into. And under those instances, it is very arrogant for opposition to say that you should play, patronage, right? Because oftentimes, if you look at many things like sports competitions are also social constructs, but we allow people to opt into it and make trade-offs because oftentimes we don't know what's best for individuals, and therefore we allow people to make choices. Because of all these reasons, we win on morality, win-win on guilt.
All right, I thank the DPM for their fine remarks and would like to invite the DLO. Here.
Okay, I'm gonna take POIs through audio and my speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'd like to start my speech by talking about like the winding, like what we need to prove as opposition. So I think both sides agree that guilt is present on both sides of the house. However, our side of the house completely rejects the characterization that the government has made on the pacifists. So according to the government, they say that the pacifists, because they're very empathetic, their entire goal is to maximize utility and to minimize the suffering that these individuals have to face. And we say this is a completely false characterization of the pacifist. If you look at the info slide, it says that this person believes in has like a non-harming, non-violence principles for like every single being, every single living being in the world, like that which expands from humans to bugs, right? So this person probably believes in equality of all the life forms that are like present on Earth, right? And if it was true that this person actually wanted to maximize the utility and minimize the suffering of these beings, then it wouldn't make sense to like weigh all kinds of like lives the same, right? They would probably think that one life that is able to like lessen suffering for like everyone else would be valued more, and therefore we should like be able to sacrifice one life over the other. But no, this person's main principle is that every single life form has some kind of value that is equal to everyone else. And therefore we see that the pacifists, what they value in life, they see like this inherent value in life, which is their core principle and their core motivation for acting. So on their POI on like suicide and how like someone who wants to kill themselves, like should we like force them to live? And when we talk about this contention, of course it's up to debate whether it's morally right or wrong to like assist suicide, right? However, as an actor, if you have this core principle that you have vowed to, that you like have sworn your life to, then of course you believe that this principle, that it is like immoral for you to like assist the suicide. Therefore, it is like immoral, and therefore you have like greater guilt on your side. So the point that we have like pointed out that the like cutting down the tree is completely clashes with the principles of the pacifist. We see like that there is like much more guilt on your side of the house than ours. Also, like there was this like small point of having like getting other people to like cut down the tree for you, and also like this is like in the perspective of pacifists, this is probably going to be the same thing. Like hiring a hitman to murder someone and murdering them yourself is like the intention is the same. You're like harming the same amount of people. Therefore, it's probably not like a big point in the debate. Okay, next, I'd like to also like rebut their point on how like living is bad right now for all bubbleheads. And we think that this is a very big mischaracterization. So first of all, let's look at Bubbleism. So Bubbleism itself is a religion, right? It's not scientific fact. The thing is, like in the info slide, it says that these bubbleheads have sentience, intelligence, and the societal structure of human beings. So which I take that point to like, that makes it like reasonable for us to like think of it in terms of like actual human religions, right? So like humans are not very like rational beings. If you look at our own world, if you look at Earth in general, we have our own religions. Like for example, let's take like Christianity. They have this concept of heaven and hell because they have like this old scripture, right? Even though there's no empirical evidence that, and like most empirical evidence and scientific evidence that we have goes against all of their beliefs. So we can actually like infer that the religion that Bubbleism has probably doesn't have any like empirical evidence to back it up. Because if it did, it probably wouldn't be a religion, right? So as a rational thinker, as a rational actor, the person in this motion is probably has a lot of doubt, because killing them would probably not like send them to a like an alternate like a heaven, right? So what you're doing is you're probably for like 99%, you're just like killing them for no reason at all. They don't like escape this mass, they don't escape into like heaven is what basically I'm saying. So like opposition, government comes and tells you that even if that is true, because they are indoctrinized to thinking living is bad, that means like they're still in like a lot of suffering and therefore we need to kill them. However, we say that if you just look at like regular like human societies, like let's just take Christianity again. Even if you have the endpoint of heaven and you think that heaven is going to be so much better than living on earth, does that mean that you just like spend your whole life suffering and like wanting to kill yourself? No, you make the most out of it. You probably still see the joy in life. You experience the highs and lows. So they're probably living like a very normal like human life right now, right? So their characterization on how like bubbleheads are living in like this kind of agony is probably untrue. And therefore, because our pacifist actually believes in like the value of life and like believes in the value, I'll take a POI if I have time, and believes that like living in itself is very valuable, they do not believe that like ending their life right now is actually morally good for them. Next, I'd like to do some weighing on like which side experiences more guilt. So yeah, even in the off chance that this person does believe that their religion is fact, you're asking them to cut down this tree, which is also, I need to emphasize, is a living thing in order to save another living thing, right? And in our info slide, we see that this person, the pacifist, views both the tree and the bubbleheads as equal human beings. So like the fact that okay, so you could say that like by inaction, you're also putting like it's also a form of violence, but this kind of violence is not comparable to actually actively cutting down and ending another life, right? So the guilt on your side of inaction is much less than the act of actually killing a tree, which is also like comparable to like murder in the perspective of a pacifist too. Yeah, so it's like fundamentally immoral for that person. So what happens in the alternative where we don't cut down the tree? So, sorry. So yeah, you experience some guilt for not killing them and for like ignoring their pleas of help. But first of all, you're not really like, you don't have the obligation, you're not obligated for you to like actually cut down the tree. So first of all, that's kind of, that's one point. Whereas like you are in your own religion, in your pacifism, you are obligated not to cut down the tree because it is a life. And you also have the guilt of having a having like potentially like killed an entire society without any like I forgot the word, but outcome that is like 100% like factual. And yeah, and also they have another rebuttal on the government is how like you have a lot of external triggers that will actually like make you more guilty. And I think this is kind of a stupid point because like this tree has been here for generations, right? Your grandparents have like passed it down to you, which means that it's been there for like hundreds of years. And like even if you have the tree that to remind you of like the fact that you didn't like cut it down, then you probably have the absence of the tree to also like make you like guilty, and you see the stump too, right? So I don't think that is like a very good point, and therefore proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, I thank the DLO for their final remarks and would like to invite the couplet. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep, audible and visible.
Okay, my speech will start. Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. So 2 clarifications. First, opposition says that somebody else can kill off these trees sometime in the future. We think that if your argument is that it is immoral to cut this tree off, presumably the extension of your argument should be that this person would create some sort of barriers to make sure that this tree goes on. Presumably this is a private backyard, which means that it's very unlikely that someone else will just impose to cut a tree on your backyard somehow. Second, like they say that this person would go against killing a tree, right? Like, I don't think that's what the info slide requires you to defend, because it says that it goes from the lowest insect, which has some level of intelligence, versus a non thinking sentient organism with tree is probably not the kind of organisms you prefer under pacifists. If that's the case, you can't eat blueberries and apples, and what do you live on, right? That's just unrealistic. So probably the actors you care about are these bubbleheads who are sentient and emotional, and that is where they should function under. First clash, why did you become a pacifist? Because their analysis is these people don't care about others. It's just that they don't want to do violent actions themselves, and that is the way in which this pacifist ideal was formed. Firstly, we thought that this is likely a very skewed characterization of pacifism, that because I don't like blood, because I don't want to feel guilt, I became a pacifist. Oftentimes, the way in which people become pacifists is that they pick up on real life experiences as they go on. They see war, they see conflict, and they see people struggle in that process, which means that this preference is likely a result of experiences and utilities that is accumulated, which means that you don't want to inflict pain on these individuals. And insofar as Hongyan has told you that making these people live on itself as a pain, this is likely to be in line with your preference to cut off the tree. But second, if you think that this is unlikely, and I think it's plausible that you might think so, and this is a purely principle-based like ideology, like your Immanuel Kant, right? We think that even in that worst case scenario, which I think they also have to defend their worst case scenario of this being based on preferences, the fact that you have encountered a new world changes the way in which you conceive of death and pain. So even if you are a totally principled believer of pacifism, still your principal belief is relying on the real life experience of death and pain. It relies on the real life conception of death, that death is irreversible, that you cannot come back from death, and all these experiences. So even the most principled beliefs is based on some real ground experiences that we go through. Why do these real life experiences of death not apply to this world? Firstly, we told you that death, like life, is equally irreversible as death in this world, which is probably why these people didn't just kill themselves off voluntarily and is requesting you to kill off, which means that in a world in which life is reversible, so you can kill yourself off at any time, then presumably the preference of life is rational and reasonable, but that does not apply to this world. Second, exclusivity. In this real life world, anyone else can kill you off, and this person can kill themselves off voluntarily by themselves. So there could be other actors who make you live, make you die. But if you kill this person off, then there is no other actors who can revive this person, right? In this world, the choice of making these people live is also exclusive insofar as there is no proof that another individual can access this portal and kill these people off. Thirdly, this is a world in which everyone wants death, right? So presumably the world in which everyone wants death is something that's unenvisionable to us people living in the real world. The conclusion of all this analysis, which went unresponded to opposition, is that the application of your pacifist belief into this new world is unlikely to stay the same, because all the way in which you have perceived the world in the past is vastly different in this world. So when you say things like rationality and LO, when you say things like this is genocide on DLO and LO, it's unlikely that these conceptions of death and pain is likely to equally apply to this world, right? So even in a worst case scenario, this is consistent with the belief of these individuals. But second, what is the moral thing to do as a second clash? So we told you firstly, the only analysis we get from opposition is, okay, we don't care about what's moral. We just want to do what's our preference and consistent with our beliefs. Firstly, we told you that it's questionable whether this action is against the belief of this individual to begin with. But second, let's bite the bullet. So this might be your principle. This might be against your belief. Why is it moral to impose your views onto another individuals and force people to live under that view? They told you, oh, we don't care about that. But you likely do, because the reason why you're a pacifist to begin with probably has something to do with moral worth, and you wanting to become a moral person, because otherwise it's much more convenient to eat meat and not live a pacifist life. So this is an important clash in the debate, right? And therefore, we think that it's immoral to impose your views on other individuals when other people have expressly showed and expressly expressed that this is their preference. They say that, oh, because like you can't assume that living is bad and religious doctrines don't have empirical evidence, this isn't a valid preference. Like, firstly, everyone believes in this. So presumably the reason why religion in our real world without empirical evidence does not have empirical evidence, and therefore not everyone believes in that. But the fact that everyone believes in this religious belief likely means that this religious belief somehow is consistent with the experiences that goes on in this new world. Second, like, presumably, if you're to assume that this is indoctrination, it has to benefit somebody for it to be an indoctrination. For instance, priests saying XYZ stuff and therefore gathering more money. But presumably, if this religious succeeds and everyone gets killed off, like, no one gets to live on, right? Which means that they're in a world in which someone is lying about this belief and persuading other people to believe in it. It's illogical for them to propagate this specific belief, because they'll be the ones who are also influenced by this belief as well. So it's likely not an indoctrination. But thirdly, even if this is indoctrination, you have no way of accessing the portal again in the future. So we can't persuade them to opt out of this belief in the future, which means that epistemically, you cannot know this is indoctrination or not, and you function under this vagueness of certainty, right? In this case, we think that it's better to prioritize the people's, the Bubbleheads beliefs that they have in the status quo. Because firstly, this belief is likely based on the lived experiences of this world and likely to be rational in the vast majority of cases. And second, validating preferences itself is valuable, regardless of how rational that is, because getting your preferences filled itself is a utility. Lastly, in terms of guilt, they said that this person cannot cope with violence. It's likely that you already know how to cope with some level of violence, because even if you're a vegan, like to make vegetables, you harm bees in many cases. Like when you use electricity, the harm trickles down to many animals, right? So the fact that you're living in this modern 21st century means that you cause some level of harm to other living organisms. The fact that you live on means that like you have some level of coping mechanism in morally gray areas. But second, we also told you about reversibility. You cannot uncut a tree, which means that when it is done, you're likely to have coping mechanisms that believe that this was the right choice to do. No response from opposition. Very proud to oppose.
All right, I thank the Gobwit for their fine remarks and would like to invite the Opwit here.
All right, just give me a sec. Hello, am I visible and audible?
Yeah, yes to both.
All right, just give me a sec. I just got a lot of papers. All right, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. How we decide when we go into and enter the religion as a non-religious people to religious people is different from how you should and would act after you become a religious person. We believe that even if the person initially believed in and hoped in the value of life and empathy, the most important thing in their life, prior to becoming a pacifist, we believe that when he becomes a pacifist, his mandates of action often change, resulting in the change of choice behavior. We believe that at the end of the day, as long as we prove that when he becomes a pacifist and his mandated actions are against his own personal empathy, we think that his actions the mandates would outweigh his personal empathy. And we're going to prove to you why. A, this person does not perceive not cutting the tree as genocide because he does not believe in the pacifist, the Bubbleheads religion. 2, even if that's not the case, he cannot partake in violent actions no matter what, regardless of the utilitarian value. We're going to prove to why pacifism and utilitarianism is a very different thing, and why the government tried to have their cake and eat it too, simply which is not possible. Note that pacifism is an act of is a religion of inaction. It is simply irrational to say that he can mend his actions to actually benefit the actual utility whenever he sees fit. When he sees certain utility value over there or life being saved, and simply he changes his actions and do violent things, that is at the get-go not pacifism. It is indeed utilitarianism. We as a human at the get-go are moderately pacifist. We don't want violent action. The difference between regular people who are peaceful and pacifists is extreme case of inaction. Even when you have the capacity to prevent problems, even when you can see and you want to prevent a certain harm from being done, because you're a pacifist, your inaction itself is your identity of your religion, which means a systemic not systemic inaction should be done if it is mandated, and we think it is the case for this actor. Note that for a pacifist, even if he sees a girl getting raped on the streets, he cannot take action because he needs to take on violent actions. That's the characteristic of pacifism. They mischaracterize pacifism completely. All they are talking about is a regular peaceful individual who is very utilitarianistic, and we don't think that's the case for this actor. But we're still gonna prove to why, even if the actor is very utilitarianistic, why this choice to cut the tree does not make any fucking sense. All right, first, why would before that one extraneous rebuttal, note that the whips wanted to make this actor not a pacifist but a fucking vegan. He wanted to say that this only applies to insects but not but not plants. Firstly, this is not true. Simply that the lowest end of things, it probably also doesn't have sensible recognition. Probably is same as plants. And note that the only push they want to say is, well, how do we fucking eat blueberries? Note that pacifism is not about the end result. End result is focused on utilitarianism. Pacifism is on acting non-violently, which means that as long as you don't partake in violent actions, no matter what happens, it is fine. It is just that you don't have to partake in active violent action. You should choose not to do violent actions. The end result doesn't matter. You can still indirectly consume blueberries because you are not actively choosing to be violent, because you have not been violent in the process. It doesn't matter, which means that still plants are a life that he values as precious, and he sees this as an agent that deserves to be prevented from being violated against. Now, that out of the way. Now we have mentioned to you why the only mechanism or way the government's mechanism can actually stand is when this actor actually believes that these bubbleheads are going to die. Why is this not the case? Note that in the status quo, when the old bitch in the street tell you that you're gonna die or go to hell when you don't believe in Jesus, do you as a rational actor believe in that? That is not the case. You don't think that is true. Rather, because you are rational, you don't believe in irrational and often fantasized beliefs of other race. What we needed to hear from the government is more specific analysis on why this bubbleless religion has such convincing power to the point that the actor should actually believe in that his own violent actions are so morally needed. Note that the religion itself is very against pacifism's principles. When pacifism believes that not taking in violent actions is the core value of life, and when the religion comes up and says actually violent action is what we completely need, it is very unlikely, A, as a rational actor, but more importantly, B, as a pacifist, it is very hard for the actor to actually believe in. So the comparative is this: at their best case, I think what the actor can believe is that, okay, the bubbleheads believes that they will not go to heaven if I don't cut the tree. So therefore they may feel emotional turmoil. That's the point this actor can believe. What we don't think is that this rational actor who is a pacifist would completely believe that this bubbleheads would actually, their religion is true. Note that in the info site, it only says that the bubbleheads believe in this religion, not the actor, which means that for the actor, the comparative is not saving lives. Rather, he is facing genocide versus emotional turmoil. And at the end of the day, as a pacifist, we believe the actor would prefer to not do genocide, even trading off some emotional turmoil throughout their life. Another thing, note that it is not that if he doesn't kill the tree, the bubbleheads just bubbleheads go to hell. They still maintain a reasonable way of life, which means that they are not in harm's way if he takes inaction, which means that it is unjustifiable to simply perceive this lack of additional benefit to the heaven from the relatively okay life as an active harm. Rather, on the comparative, if we think that we might do genocide, it is an active harm and violence. And note that even if we don't consider the blue heads or what heads, we still think that at the end of the day, we still kill the tree, and that's problematic. That's first certain, but more importantly is that because he's a pacifist who believes that he should be non-violent to all actors, regardless of plant or sentient being, which means that if he even if he believes in the religion, he is sacrificing the plant for the betterment of other lives. And we think that this is unjustifiable, as this leaves out the tree from system of redress from anything, which means that it is still unjustifiable at the end of the day. Very proud to support inaction.
All right, I thank the Upwhip for their fine remarks and would like to invite the Up reply. Here.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, in order for Gov to take this debate, they need to prove to us why actively inciting violence against their own values is actually justified in this case. However, I feel like government completely loses this case in their characterization of the pacifist. The pacifist, you have to take into consideration that pacifism isn't the same as just empathy, right? It's a very extreme stance in which you completely, it's more extreme than just having a lot of empathy, which is like comparable to, like, as our previous speaker said, to regular human beings, right? You have this extreme level of belief, and even if it does come out of some kind of experience, it comes out of empathy, it has like solidified itself as a core value that you hold, that you should never, ever, ever in any circumstance hurt a human being because they have that inherent value of life, right? And because the government has refused to engage with this characterization of the pacifist, they first of all lose. However, let's see what the government, let's look at the government's case. So they say that empathy is the driving factor for the pacifist, and therefore making bubbleheads happy will make you happy. Okay, let's like tear this apart. So first of all, the empathy part, we tell you why that's false in like the values. However, let's also, the government, another thing that the government does badly is they take for granted that it is actually the religion of Bubbleism is true, which they give the one justification I hear for this argument is that everyone believes in this religion, which is why it's probably true, right? However, we say, like, even in the status quo, we see oppressive religions that are nationwide, that are like, that encompass like very large regions, even though they, like, from an objective stance, they may or may not be true. They don't have any logical backing. They have no empirical evidence, right? So this doesn't really stand in how Bubbleism is true or not, and more importantly, how the actor perceives Bubbleism. So we tell you that the actor in today's debate has a very big doubt on whether or not this Bubbleism will actually make these people happier. And even so, therefore, even if this empathy as a like driving factor of this actor's actions is true, they probably think that making people happy will what would make people happy is actually just like leaving the tree be, which, as we have characterized in our previous speeches, would probably just be like them being in like a very normal human society, right? So just to do a little more weighing, I guess. So what we as the opposition bring into the debate is the action of inaction, right? So this number one, it coincides with our values. Therefore, we have no inner turmoil. And it probably with like a 99% chance, it probably results in the betterness of the Bubbleheads, which makes us happier, right? However, let's look at the action and like cutting down the tree that the government proposes. So first of all, it completely disregards the core values that we as a pacifists hold and have held for the rest of the longevity of our lives. And number two, as the actor, whether or not this Bubbleism religion is correct, if we have a rational thinker, then we're probably going to think that it has ended in a bad result. Whereas in our side of the world, where we did leave them to just live normal lives, we still have that consolidation that they still have a good life. They have like a regular normal human life, in which we actually, as a pacifist, hold very much like a very big value in, which serves as consolidation, whether or not the Bubbleism religion is true or not. And yeah, proud to oppose.
All right, I thank the op reply for their fine remarks and would like to invite the gov reply to close the debate.
Hi. Assuming that I'm audible, I'll just begin. So this debate ultimately boils down into what is the characteristic and the priority of this person as a pacifist. They basically say that, oh, moral value is important. Non-violence is an absolute value that you have to buy into. And opposition whip's last Hail Mary here is that, oh, like inaction is the only utmost principle that you have to buy into. We told you that this is not the case, because what if you also inflict violence because you don't do anything, especially when you actively chose not to help these people when they sincerely requested you to do so? You let these people to be stuck in the life of despair. These people already have a self-preservation incentive, right? Probably these people wouldn't want to live, especially when they have the same similar sentient characteristic as human beings. But these people are actively and sincerely requesting you to kill them, especially because these people think that their current life is something that is not meaningful in comparison to the life that they can access in the future by death, which is a paradise that has been described by all the religious principles at the end of the day. That exactly is the reason that's why opposition whips coming like very lame analysis saying that, oh, like inaction is the utmost principle, which is anyways very specific version of pacifism, and they didn't really explain as to why that version of pacifism is the most like likely version of pacifism that this person is going to buy into. So the second thing here we also want to make is that you also make many real life compromises as explained in government whip. You have to eat blueberries, you have to eat rice in order for you to sustain your own lives. And then Optimist response here said, oh, like, but you don't directly like kill these blueberries, so it's kind of like, okay, but we told you coming from Prime Minister that we also don't have to directly kill these people. Like, for example, you can just say hire other person to just cut the trees. Why do you have to actually actively take part into, for example, seeing the viscerality of these people actually being killed at the end of the day? They never give any analysis to do so. The second thing I want to talk about is that, so what does the life of Bubblehead actually looks like? This is to kind of like trying to delineate the certainty of how these people would actually have a life in the current and future life at the end of the day. It is unfair for opposition to assume that our benefit of salvation is uncertain, while the benefit of saving life is certain at the end of the day. Because under either side of the house, you don't have the epistemic access to what these people actually think, and then we have to rely on indirect evidences to actually delineate, to at least have a better certainty to decide what is the better thing for these Bubblehead people. Under our side of the house, we say two things. The first thing we told you is that the very stakeholder themselves are actively pleading for them. That their afterlife paradigm, they actually decided to believe in the fact that their afterlife paradise is substantially better than their shitty despair in the current life at the end of the day. You have to compare this to their side of the house, where you have to arbitrarily assume the exact opposite to what these Bubbleheads want to say, and you are forcing your own arbitrary standard to these people when these particular people are actually demanding for the exact opposite. The second thing is that, oh, but like this is just like a belief system. You don't really know whether or not these people are going to go to like paradise. It doesn't matter because we told you that this is what these people believe. So even in the worst case scenario where these people don't go to the paradise after death, while they die, while they just like die, and in a particular process, they still believe that this death is going to lead to more dignified life at the end of the day. These people still believe that this is the most dignified way of living and ending a life at the end. And we told you as to why, in terms of violence, subjectivity still matters, because even if you inflict certain physical pain, that is not perceived the same by person. People can actively delineate the degree of the extent of that particular physical pain on their any side of the house. And we told you that this particular pain is not going to be as substantial in comparison to the substantial benefit and the happiness that these people can actually access by believing the fact that this particular death is going to lead to the paradise at the end of the day. The particular conclusion here is that we showed a substantial likelihood that a Bubblehead people are going to be heavily indoctrinated to this particular religious belief, and these people are going to believe that this is going to be the best thing for their life. And I think that exactly is the reason that's why it is much more certain that these people will be happier and feel more dignified on their side of the house, whereas under their side of the house, when you have to just arbitrarily impose your own standard to force these people to continue on their life when these people don't want to continue their life at the end of the day. That's why we win.
All right, I thank the Gov reply and everyone for a interesting round. Can you guys give us like 10 minutes? So we'll call you back at like 22. Yeah, if that's all good. All right, thanks everyone.